Welcome to another exciting podcast of Royal Oak Victory Church. We're glad you've joined us. We are a community devoted to God, connected to others, and influencing our world.
Last several weeks, I did want to sort of bridge where we've come from. So we've been doing a series that we finished last week called Fear and Noia. And today's message, kind of where we're going to be going topically speaking, is going to try to serve as, like a bonus feature of a movie, right? Some of these bonus features have an alternate ending. So rather than living lives in fear and out of fear and sort of the pain and struggle and anxiety and stress and things that come from that, what we're going to be kind of looking at today is an alternate way to live our lives, on a day in, day out basis with community, in community, etc. So, I guess as we went through this series, right, Fear and Noia, I found myself asking the question, if I don't want to live in fear, how then should I be living? How then should we live? As I've been thinking about that, for some reason, Sunday school, when I was a kid, pops into my head. I didn't go to Sunday school a lot, but a few times. And I wonder if you can sort of visualize this scene with me, right? You have a Sunday school teacher. They are sitting in a chair that is way too small. So first off, we got to find, get to the right. You're like 6 inches off the ground, that sweet spot. And if you're getting older, you're thinking, man, where's the big chairs, right? So that's where the scene starts. You got a teacher sitting in their little chair. Got all these beautiful, lovely kids that are surrounding the teacher. Everybody's dressed really nice. Their hair is done very well. Their clothes are ironed, right? Who irons their kids' clothes? You have too much time in your life. The other thing is, for some reason, I pictured everybody's got matching socks. We have so many missing socks at our house that I just find it amazing to go to my son's class, and everybody's got the same socks. Like, what happened to our socks? So everybody's got the socks. Nobody's talking out of turn. Nobody's goofing off. Everybody's listening, and the teacher would say to the kids, so how should we live our lives, or to whom should we live like, right? What's the answer? We should live like Jesus. Gold stars. I heard some here, one way back there. Congratulations. You've passed Sunday School 101, right? Obviously, the answer usually, is we're to love like Jesus, live like Jesus, and we're going to be looking at that this morning. One of the ways, or the way that we're going to be looking at specifically, Paul is addressing the Corinthian church. And the Corinthian church, had some issues, some relational baggage, some different conflicts and challenges that were kind of going on within the church and, in the body of believers, even had trouble connecting with those outside the church. And so Paul, being the wonderful pastor that he was in that time, he wrote them a letter to sort of help guide these people, into more fully living in God's ways and living with each other. All right, so how many people have actually written a letter? Like written it, put a stamp on it, and actually send it to somebody before? How many people? So for the young people in here, people used to communicate this way. Right before cell phones, before Wi-Fi, before social media platforms, if you had a friend or a loved one that lived in a faraway place, you would actually get a writing utensil out. You'd sit down at a desk or a table or something, and a pencil or pen, or, in the old days, you'd get like a bird feather, right? You'd dip it into the ink, and you'd write a letter saying, hey, how are you? I've been thinking about you. Tell me a bit about what's going on in your life, etc. And it was like these correspondence would take a long time because somebody, not some sort of technology that magically, I type it, I press send, and it's there within an instant, right? Somebody would carry these messages, pigeons and people on horseback, right? So for all the young people, that was a little bit of a history of what happened. And it's really to point out, Paul, in those days, right, he didn't have the benefit or the access to FaceTime or to the internet. So he would write letters to the churches that he'd started and try to encourage these believers in the different issues and with the different issues that they were struggling with or working through as a church. Kind of jumping ahead from in 1 Corinthians to chapter 12, there's this beautiful, elegant, sort of dissertation about the body of believers and all the bodies working together, and this is how it's supposed to be. And at the very end of that chapter is where we're going to kind of pick off. Paul writes this phrase, "And now I will show you the most excellent way." Right? And kind of what's implied here is, now I will show you the most excellent way to live your lives together, in community and in the communities that you live. Right? So what he's getting at here is that there's a blueprint. There's a way to do this, how we're to live sort of in concert, in harmony with each other, with God, being led by the Spirit of God, bearing the fruit of the Spirit of God, and so forth. So I want to jump into the chapter 13. I'm going to paraphrase a few of the first verses just to sort of bring it into today's context, or to attempt to bring it into today's context, and then I'm going to read a few of the verses as they are written. Again, paraphrase verse 1. If we could speak in any language on earth, there are over 7,000 languages on the earth, give or take. And languages are actually becoming more and more extinct, on a daily, annual basis. But if we knew all of those, right, and did not have love, we're going to see this refrain over and over again throughout this chapter. But if you do not have love, Paul essentially writes, we are like the never-ending sound of an alarm clock. You know that sound. Come on. How many of you guys, that's one of your least favorite sounds on the earth? Let's show of hands. The stress levels are rising as you think about that, about waking up and the struggle. Right? So that's what he's saying, is if you know all these things, all these different languages, and you can speak them fluently and teach other people to speak them, but if you don't have love, you're an alarm clock. Right? And then he goes on. He says, if I have all the knowledge and all of the answers, anything that could be known, albeit on any search engine, whether it's Google or Firefox or Safari, right? If you were able to know everything that's out there in the internet or on the internet, and if you had a faith that could literally and physically move mountains, but if you did not have love, it would be worth nothing. He goes on, if you were to give all you possess to the poor and needy around the world, if you were to give your body to be unjustly tortured, right? If you were to do all of those things, but if you don't have love, it's worth nothing. Right? Listen to these characteristics as we kind of go on in the chapter. And I want us to sort of think about these, in ourselves. Do we see these in ourselves, whether it's at home, whether it's at work or school, any of the places that we live and carry on? And he writes in verse 4, love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It is not rude. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. And here's the last sentence. This is, love never fails. Now, I'm coming here this morning, understanding that in my own life, specifically as a parent, I have been lacking in love. I've been impatient, and I've kind of gotten into this rut in my own house. So I'm coming as one knowing that I need to work in this area. I need to grow in this area. I need to, and want to, for that matter, to become more loving in my life. And I want us to kind of think about those verses, right? You've got patience and kindness, and you have all these beautiful, harmonious attributes. And if we look at those kind of in contrast to what we've been studying and looking at the last few weeks, fear, right? The contrast is glaring. Right? Fear is toxic. It limits us. It binds us like handcuffs, right? It holds us back, holds our loved ones back. And the most excellent way, this way of love, it never fails. Right? So, I guess the kind of follow-up question that naturally flows out of that is this type of most excellent way, this type of love that's characterized, from a sacrificial basis, as sacrificial love, is so hard to do. right? It's so hard to live this way, day in, day out. And, there's a number of reasons why it's hard to live in love, but we're going to go through a few of those today. The first one, and the first reason that I've kind of put down why it's so hard is because quitting is easier, right? You get into a hard situation, be it school or work or whatever, and the easiest thing to do would be to, stop doing it, to procrastinate, to put it off, do it tomorrow. That's a famous refrain from all of our kids. I'll do it later. No, you won't. Right? If you're a parent, that's not going to happen. Right? Quitting is fairly easy. And listen to this. I found this study that's done by the Forbes Corporation. And there are more than 2 million people who are quitting their jobs every month in North America. Right? So if we do the math, 2 million times 12, we're talking about more than 24 million people every year who are just quitting their jobs in an unstable economy, right, with all kinds of questions about, will you be able to find another job, so on and so forth, right? So there's all of these people quitting their jobs, and here are the top 3 reasons as to why people quit their jobs. Number 1, people quit because they receive a lack of recognition for the work that they're doing, right? People want to be recognized, and when they're not recognized, that's reason number 1 why they're quitting. Number 2, the second reason why people no longer want to work at their place of employment is because of the internal politics, right? That's the conflict. That's the he said this, well, she said that, and oh man, right? It's all this back and forth, but that is wearing on people, and that's the second reason why they quit. Number 3 was a tie. There's 2 reasons, actually, for number 3. The first one is that people felt a lack of empowerment to do the things that they were, supposed to be doing or wanted to be doing. And then the tie, and the other third place one was one that I thought was very funny, and that is because people did not like their boss. I can tell by the laughter that some of you probably don't like your boss. I've had bosses that have not been too fun to work for, right? There are so many different reasons. The list was actually very long. I just kind of plucked a few off the top there. But people quit for various reasons. And I know that there are, kind of extenuating circumstances as to why people do what they do. I mean, there's illness, there's all kinds of different abuses that happen out there. So I'm not naive to think that people are only doing it for those things, that there's legitimate reasons why somebody would do what they do. But some alarming statistics that I found, right, is, if we look at the family, if we take it out of the work context, bring it into family, in Canada, right, 4 out of every 10 marriages ends in divorce because marriage is hard. The issues that come up, the day in, the day out challenges, those things are significant and they're challenging, right? If we look even, a little bit further, and I want to be really sensitive with this, but, suicide is actually one of the top 10 reasons as to why people are dying every year in this country. And again, there are circumstances as to how that is happening and why that is happening, other than people just kind of quitting on the relationships of their lives. But these things sort of speak to the significance and the sensitivities that we live in an era, in a culture, where people quit on anything and everything, and we have probably been in those shoes at different points in our lives where we stop doing something because it's hard, because it's difficult, because it's not worth it, the payoff or whatever it is, that happens and comes along, okay? So in an effort to try to, move on from there, there's a second reason why people have a hard time living in this most excellent way of love. And that is because loving sacrificially causes and requires us to look beyond ourselves, our circumstances, our desires, our situations, right? I'm a parent. There are parents out here. I'm not trying to just throw parent stuff out constantly. But it became clear very early on when we had our oldest that sharing toys was going to be a problem in our house, right? Some of your houses may be the same thing. I have a 2-year-old son right now. He's the baby. and we're done. There are no more children coming in the Archuleta household, and his favorite word is mine. Right? And he almost curls up. I said this earlier, like Gollum from the Lord of the Rings. Mine. And, he's holding whatever it is that he just cannot live without. And it's usually actually not his. It's usually his brother's or his sister's or his mom's phone or whatever. Mine. Right? And it's like, I feel like he's saying, over my dead body. I'm never giving this back. Right? Selfishness is a characteristic that we all, in honesty, wrestle with, struggle with, could be daily, weekly, at different points of our lives. It can be a distraction for us. Just a kind of a quick story here. When I was a kid, I'll share this quickly. My brother was 4 years old. On his birthday, got a crisp, perfect $10 bill from Grandpa. Again, this is his birthday. And I saw that $10 bill and I really liked it. And so instead of just stealing it from him, I wasn't the bigger brother. I could have done that. I went to my piggy bank and I thought, I have two $1 bills. I can trade him. Two bills are better than one, right? So that's what I did. I went to my brother. I presented my proposal. Hey, man, I got two. You got one. We should make this deal, make it happen. And you know what? He went for it. So I'm up $8. It's like the stock market exchange in my life is booming. So I'm excited. The trouble was my brother was also really excited. He went and told Mom, look at the great deal I just got. And I don't know why, as a kid, you don't think through these things. He's going to be excited about this. I just tricked him, and this is probably not going to end well for me. And it didn't, right? So what happened is my mom, she's taller than me, so it felt like she was probably storming towards me. She probably wasn't. But she's coming, and what happened? Guess what happened? I'm trying to be selfish. I'm trying to make a few bucks. She took my entire piggy bank, emptied it out, and gave it all to my brother. All of it. And she made me give the $10 back. I was like, well, at least let me have the $10. And she was like, no, siree, right? So selfishness actually works like that in our lives, right? We think we're getting more and saving more and keeping more when actually we're not. And there's a bunch of things out there that kind of speak to habitually selfish people and where they end up in life. And I'll bet as you listen to these, it's not where they want to. Selfish people, it says, experience consistently higher levels of guilt because of what they're doing, what they're hiding, anything and everything that sort of falls under that category. A habitually selfish person will have less real friends, if any friends at all, in their lives. A habitually selfish person lacks empathy and compassion, and that is a real struggle for them. All right, a selfish person typically feels as though they are actually less worthy than the people around them. And the final one kind of for this morning is a selfish person is actually innately insecure. Every day they're trying to measure up, compare themselves, compare their stuff, protect it, guard it, keep it, right? There's this internal struggle that's constantly happening. And it's actually not getting them or getting us, because we're all selfish at times, to where we really want to be and want to go. Okay, the third reason that we've kind of just got for this morning as to why this most excellent way of love is so hard is because some people are really, 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 really hard to love. You're laughing. In your life who I'm talking about, right? Some people, there's people who talk too much. Like me, maybe people talk too loud, right? They gossip. They're full of anger and hate, and it's just boiling over and out of their lives all the time. There's people who are arrogant and cocky. There's people who are fake and phony. There's liars, bullies, people who cheat, people who steal, people who are just plain stubborn, right? I'm not moving. There are people who take 2 parking stalls at the grocery store instead of 1, and they're right at the front. right? Okay, we're not wanting some pet peeve land, right? But there's people, I drive downtown a lot, there's people who cut you off. And then they do this. They sort of like turn around and wave at you like, hey, thanks for letting me in there. I didn't let you in. Man, you almost crashed into my car stealing that space, right? So there's all of these people in our lives, and if we are honest, or if we're not so honest, I would encourage you to go home and ask your spouse about all the ways that you were unlovable. At times, right? And we'll get some honesty in there at some point. If we're honest, we all do this. We all have some of these traits, and that's not every day. It's not all the time. But God has certainly called us to more than that, to a greater, more influential life than that. And that's where we're going to be going. So how do we live in a most excellent way where we can foster and develop all of these attributes, kindness and love, etc.? So we're calling these sort of for today love principles, but these are principles that we can live by. Principle number 1 is to love God first. Love God with your best. I put the verse down there, Mark 12:30. There are numerous verses that sort of say the same thing, and it's throughout the entire Bible, Old Testament, New Testament, but something along the lines of we should love God with all of our heart, with all of our soul, with all of our mind, with all of our strength, with everything we can, everything we have. And there's something I learned this week that was fascinating to me. But if we go back to Deuteronomy chapter 6, right? These verses are actually an echo of, a very influential, famous piece of Jewish culture and religion and Judaism. And that is the Shema. And there's this saying, this prayer, right? And it's the oldest fixed daily prayer that the Jewish people have been reciting every morning, every evening, every day for like 10,000 years. And it's the Lord our God is one. And we should love him with all of our heart, all of our soul, all of our mind, all of our strength, right? So our Jewish friends, they've woven this into their lives, and kind of where we're going is that this type of thinking, this type of relationship development, where we prioritize our relationships and our direction in life be around, what God is doing and where he is going. Quick story, when I was in college, when I'm doing devotions, right, if you do the same thing over and over again, you can kind of fall into a rut. And somebody I think talked to me about doing this one time, but I started a new devotion when I was in college. And instead of just reading the Bible, I was going to take the role of a young scribe, right? I'm going to write every chapter, word for word, down. And I tackled this big thing, and I thought, this is going to be awesome. Never realizing how long it would take, how hard it would be. So it's going good, all the details of creation, awesome. We got Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. It's one of my favorite characters in the Bible. You got Moses, the 10 Commandments, and then it's like, the story, just isn't there anymore, right? I'm writing about all of the articles in the tent of meeting and the tabernacle and the possessions of all the different tribes, Levi, Reuben, Simeon. And I genuinely was trying to grow, but found myself thinking, Lord, there is so much impractical information that I feel like I'm writing down. Is this worth it? Should I keep doing this? And I genuinely had like a wrestling with God. And I didn't have a peace about stopping, so I just kind of kept doing it. And all of a sudden, you get through Leviticus, all those Levitical laws, and heaven forbid you break one of them. Because then there's a whole another routine, right, that you had to do, and there's all these places and all these towns and all these beautiful Jewish names. And Lord, forgive me, my Jewish accent is terrible. I've just butchered these people's names my whole life, right? So I'm writing all these things down, and then I come across this pattern, and I think it starts in Numbers chapter 9. And what happens is Moses and the leaders of Israel, they design all of the tribes, and they kind of set them up into different camps. And everything was kind of centered around the tent of meeting. And what happens is that God's presence comes in and that kind of rests over the top of the tent of meeting. So God's presence, and it's a cloud by day, it's a pillar of fire by night. And sometimes the cloud would stay in the same spot for a day. Sometimes it was for a week. Sometimes it was for, a couple of years even. But when the cloud would move, when God would move, his people would follow. God would move, the people would follow. God would move, the people would follow. And I genuinely felt as though God was speaking to me and telling me, where I go, you should follow. Where I go, you should follow. And I don't think I ever would have got that had I not been willing to sort of, just do something different, to really try to grow, as hard as it was, as obnoxious as some of those things were I felt like I was writing. But if we could do that, imagine if we get up in the morning and look for God. Where is he moving? We should follow. If he's going this way, we should go that way. If he's going to go this way. So that's kind of what this is getting at, right? Where we love God, we develop a relationship with him whereby we, are working and growing in all of our mind, all of our heart, all of our strength, and everything in who we are. Right? So that was kind of number one, principle number one. Love principle number two is this. Through a visible love of our family, love of our friends, love of our foes, our enemies, the people we don't like, in doing those things and loving those people, the world would know that God is who he says he is. That's one of the ways Jesus writes this in John chapter 13, verse 35. He says, by love, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. Not necessarily if you're nice, not necessarily if you're generous, but it's this kind of love where you give of yourself, of your time, of your resources to the people in your life. We live in this world that is skeptical, right? This is an information age, right? All of this information is coming at people all the time, coming at you, coming at me. And what happens is because there's so much coming at us so fast, we start to dismiss things rather easily. And the culture that we live in dismisses things so easily. So even if we're to tell somebody the good news about Jesus, it's like, their filter's constantly just tossing stuff out. What if we show them love, this kind of love, this most excellent way, this kind of sacrifice and commitment on a day in, day out, consistent basis where it becomes part of our character, they will know something is different and they will know that it's real. There's a story in the Old Testament that I love, and I've really kind of been just so encouraged by this story again lately, and that's the story of Ruth. Small little book, 4 chapters. And what happens is, I'm just kind of going to skip to the end, but Ruth is a Moabite, which means she's a foreigner. She's a widow. And she commits her life to her mother-in-law. Now, I want you to think about committing your life to your mother-in-law. Let's be real for a minute here. She commits her life to her mother-in-law. Her mother-in-law, her husband had died. Ruth's husband was actually Naomi's son. So there's this loss. There's all this loss. There's all this heartbreak, discouragement, bitterness is what Naomi calls herself in her life. She's like, don't call me Naomi anymore, call me bitter. So they go back from where they were living to their homeland in Israel. And what happens is that Ruth is like so tenacious and just commits herself to loving Naomi. It's amazing. And what happens actually, we're going to skip all the way to the end of the story, but the people who watch this, the neighbors, the friends, the family, the people who watch Ruth, jump over and work through all of these different gender boundaries that she did. She worked through as working as a woman, right? There's all of that stuff that she had to work through. There's all of this racism tension that she had to work through as a Moabite. Moabites were not on good terms with the Israelites, right? So there's all this racial tension that she has to work through, and she just loves Naomi, and it doesn't matter. She goes even all through all of the, sorry, where was I going there? The racial stuff, the gender stuff, and the religious stuff. She even goes through all of that just to say, you know what, I'm going to serve Naomi with my whole life in every which way. And at the end, everybody who's watched this whole story unfold is like praising God. And they say, praise be to God because Naomi, you have been given Ruth, and she's better to you than 7 sons. And that can very easily be read. She's loved you better than 7 sons would love you. And then, the story goes on where she's her son becomes the grandfather of King David, and she gets woven in to the lineage of Jesus because her love is so extraordinary, right? That is the kind of thing that people will notice if we commit to those things, if we're consistent in it, if we grow and walk in that way. The last point for us this morning, last love principle that we can live by is this: to never give up. Don't quit. Embrace the challenge. There are hard days, there are bad days, but even if we sort of see them coming and can work through them or find relationship and community as a body of believers to grow and to move forward. I love this verse from Hebrews chapter 12. It says, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses," brothers and sisters in this room, people who have encouraged you in your faith journey from years past, even cities and towns and countries past, right? Our heroes of the faith, since we're surrounded by all of these people, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race that's marked out for us. Life is hard. Things get hard. Challenges come. You may be in a situation like that at this point. And if we're willing to persevere, to work through it, become a little more thick-skinned when necessary, to become a little more tough and gritty and develop stronger spiritual muscles, a stronger spiritual mind, stronger relationships, right? If we're able to strengthen our resolve, and in the end, if we can persistently keep moving toward Jesus, with Jesus, that is a principle that we can live by to sort of honor God and to live in the most excellent way of love. And in closing, I just want us to think about and consider Jesus. Consider the one who lived his whole life in this most excellent way. Every day, every circumstance, every challenge, so much so that at the end of his life, he's hanging unjustly, crucified, on a tree in our place, right? In my place. He says these words, "It is finished." Fear is finished. Death is finished. Right? The destructive power of sin in our lives, it's all finished. And it's through his death, his life, we're forgiven and we're given a new citizenship into the kingdom of heaven. A kingdom that we're supposed to live on earth as it is in heaven. Right? I want to close with 1 Corinthians 13 could be read this way. Jesus is patient. He is kind. He does not envy. He does not boast. He is not proud. He is not rude. He is not self-seeking. He is not easily angered. He keeps no record of wrongs. He does not delight in evil, but rejoices in the truth. He always protects us, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Jesus never fails. He has loved us in the most excellent way possible. And in part, he has done that so that we would in turn love others the same way. Let's bow together. Jesus, thank you. Lord, thank you for the second chances that you give us in life. For the way that you loved us in the past, the way that you love us in the present, the way that you love us in the future. I thank you that you love everyone the same way, regardless of what they've done or where they've been. And I pray that your Spirit would nudge us this morning, all of us, to give and receive more grace and to give and receive more of the love that you've given, which is the most excellent way we can live our lives. Thank you for these people at this time. In Jesus' name, all God's people said.